Yeah. On 44 shit, don't man. Busy man, busy man. Look, when that shit drop, you step all the way on their neck, step on their neck and they head with that shit.
Fine then, I ain't show no mercy, we gon' show them boy what time it is. I pop out like I'm Samuel, I got time to kill. Haters thought I died, I survived, they don't know how I did it. Got it out the mud, straight to glory, they don't know how I did it. He nice, but he don't show them skills, how I show them skills. He ride, but he don't work the wheel, how I work the wheel. They mad, I'm too solid, circle tight, yeah, vacuum seal. No, they want my life, I ain't worried, I got rank for real. I got real soldiers, kill for me, nigga, watch yourself. They say you been in beast mode lately, you is not yourself. When you dropping that fire, precious man, stay inquiring. They can't stop what's coming, but I see them conspiring. Cross the line, them firing. This bitch here, finna break this spin. No kindness, I don't trust you, circle small. You can keep your features. Me and my niggas don't keep no secrets. In the field like Jeepers Creepers, say they want some smoke, dawg. So I brought these chimney sweepers. Coming like we coming, you can't even cap. These niggas don't run it like we running, bitch, don't even start. Bitch, I'm with my niggas till the end, till death do us part. So if you wanna leave, you can leave, bitch, bless your heart. Fine then, I ain't show no mercy, we gon' show them boy what time it is. I pop out like I'm Samuel, I got time to kill. Haters thought I died, I survived, they don't know how I did it. Got it out the mud, straight to glory, they don't know how I feel. He nice, but he don't show them skills, how I show them skills. He ride, but he don't work the wheel, how I work the wheel. Ooh, I got a man, circle tight, yeah, vacuum seal. I heard they want my life, I ain't worried, I got rate for real. Take over in effect, yeah, I'm fully focused. You might not see it on me, just know it's women, that bitch fully loaded. Ooh, yeah, we up and rolling. Told them I need major motion. Think I'm joking, I'ma school them niggas like they baby Jody. Got it out the dust, now I'm too clean, don't know why they hate me. What you want out life, dawg? Guns and butter, baby boy. UPK top, dawg. Certified road runner. I'ma turn that econ line van to a damn tank. I got chopper stash in that attic like they Anne Frank. They had that shit on lock till I snapped on them like bolt cutters. You cannot play both sides, gotta choose your colors. See him throwing that one up with that W, that's my blood, bro. Fine then, I ain't show no mercy, I'm gon' show them boy what time it is. I pop out like I'm Samuel, I got time to kill. Haters thought I died, I survived, they don't know how I did it. Got it out the dust, straight to glory, they don't know how I feel. He nice, but he don't show them skills, how I show them skills. He ride, but he don't work the wheel, how I work the wheel. Ooh, I got a made, circle tight, yeah, vacuum seal. Said they want my life, I ain't worried, I got rate for real.
Fuck wrong with you, boy? You know what time it is, nigga. Better watch how you step in. Yeah. But that was my niggas. I'm in it, yo. Got my nigga Ramon with me. But that was my niggas, it'll be an honor. You know what I'm saying? Under commanding General, your honor. That for my niggas, it'll be an honor and a blessing. Look, hey, straight off the top, I love all of my niggas. That shit ain't gon' stop till we on top and we ballin', my nigga. We be fly as fuck, you know them bitches be stalking my niggas. That shit'll never change and it's the same with all my niggas. City to city, I should be at home, that's what my ribs say. But bitch, I'm grown, I'm in these streets and closed caption. Niggas know we bout that action. If a nigga play with me, then my hock I'm gon' let him have it. Hey, think you the shit, this truth the shit. Nigga play, I let that Ruger hit. Get on them tracks, they be like, who is this? I'm rude with it, ain't got no manners. All them pussy niggas talking shit, yeah, I know they can't stand us, but we UPK Louisiana, bitch, that's what I'm rippin'. And my niggas solid number, real ones in my section. If you wanna get down, put your boots on, start stepping. Brotherhood is a weapon. Brotherhood is a weapon. Better watch how you steppin', cause brotherhood is a weapon. If I die for my niggas, it'll be an honor and a blessing. Better watch how you steppin', cause brotherhood is a weapon. Brotherhood is a weapon. Better watch how you steppin', cause brotherhood be a dad from the struggle. Born again from a life of sin, trapping together. My mind frame was to kill my own kind. Feeling inferior, waking up ready to die. Run with them killers, so it's just a matter of time. For why take your life or let you take mine? That's when I realized the slaves killing slaves while the white man live to get old. We in them graves, shit got me feeling plain. I opened the Bible, went through them records, found out we was royalty, a nation to be respected. But in this world we rejected, we hated for our complex. Still fighting to get accepted. We hear the truth and reject it, but love is getting corrected. And all my niggas correct me. The commandments, the foundation we erected. Brotherhood is a weapon. Brotherhood is a weapon. Better watch how you stepping, cause brotherhood is a weapon. If I die for my niggas, it'll be an honor and a blessing. Better watch how you stepping, cause brotherhood is a weapon. Brotherhood is a weapon. Better watch how you stepping, cause brotherhood is a weapon. If I die for my niggas, it'll be an honor and a blessing. Better watch how you stepping, cause brotherhood is a weapon. Hey, hey. Hey, hey.
Buck roll.
This shit gon' ride. Living in the You'll never see another nigga like this. Used to have that white bitch popping on the night shift. Now I'm one westward, sharper than an ice pick. On you rappers' necks and it's feeling like some vice grips. Yeah, that's light shit. Send my bro a kite quick. Ties of war, we ain't forget about you. Keep your light lit. Rappers can't see. Most of them scared to witness. Go on, close your eyes. There's one right here for the trenches. Bad bitches, natural hair or extensions. Hood niggas that'll probably grip like some dentures. Brothers on them fences. 23 and 1 out. Praying that that commissary hit before it run out. Bitches on the gram, dog filter with their tongue out. Couldn't stay home because they found the dugout. Closed casket, burner in the low jacket. My co-captain, riding on these whole rappers. My hoes fabulous. Now I don't mean that derogatory, but I'm a player and there's no my women riding for me. I avoided Maury. I got 2 jets. If I can't make it through for them, then I'm useless. Sit down that roof, Chris, with a couple bosses. After the war, just to count our losses. It's not many. You see a smile on my face, but I'm not friendly. Gun on my waist, sipping white Henny. I just hope this shit go right. Living in the dark, you don't know light. Gotta got my heart, grip my bow tie. Waiting on this war been my whole life. I just hope this shit go right. Living in the dark, you don't know light. Gotta got my heart, grip my bow tie. Living in this war been my whole life. My whole life. It's so melodic. When I be dropping this ebonics, this ghetto phonics, they got me on the level supersonic. My bomb atomic, and you know where you can find me. Somewhere probably folding this paper origami. My name is pure as the Dasani, my wave is like a tsunami. I went from 0 to 100, feeling like Ricky Bobby. I made a deal with the Reaper. Got a couple wives, they some keepers. Talk a lot of shit, but you can't walk a mile in my sneakers. Bitches go to Miami, come home with change features. Now she got a BBL, her ass fatter. Trying to show up all them niggas that laughed at her. Now when they see her, they only wanna fuck her. They just wanna touch her, they don't wanna cuff her. They just wanna come and kick it with her like a punter. Turned her to a runner, now it's all aboard the train. Fenty on her face, but it's not concealing the pain, it's a shame. So I'm in the hood like some rap snacks. I know niggas kill you and your mama for a scat pack. Dark tint, matte black, they do it for half that. Had you like 90s Missy in a fucking trash bag. I'm from Philly, we don't do bank accounts, just cash app. I spit a verse and I just watch the time slow. It's that guy flow, it's that shit that rappers die for. It's that uncut Taha Wall straight from Pablo Escobar. I be at the ball like Moscato. They think it's effort, but no, this that block work. Make the countermeasures, take pleasures, making an op hurt. Lighters in the sky, cause every verse is a concert. My mind work at speed y'all can't fathom. Listen to the words of a champion. They can't, the streets need another anthem. I just hope this shit go right. Living in the dark, you don't know light. Gotta got my heart, grip my bow tie.
Hey, Shalom Israel. Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai Baraka Thumb to the brothers watching. Yahweh Shemar Thumb Bashem Yahweh Shai to the sisters. So ISUPK started out at 1 West 125th Street, Harlem, New York, under Commander General Yohana, Precinct Officer Howard Marr, ISUPK, Kentucky. And it's Sunday night, so we finna get into what you didn't learn in history class, episode 22. And you can see on the screen here, we finna talk about the Civil War. Now, why the Civil War? Well, there's a lot of history in the Civil War that's not taught in schools, and for a reason too. Second reason is we got an election coming next year, and we're going to get into why politics has gotten so important in the Black and Hispanic communities. Let's go ahead and get into it. All right, the Civil War. First slide we're going to get into. All right, so everything that we think we know about American history in general and about Civil War history in particular comes from a 10-volume set written by 28th President Woodrow Wilson. All right, everything that we think we know about history comes from a 10-volume set by 28th President Woodrow Wilson. Now, what he did in the late 1910s, early 1920s, he compiled American history. He compiled American history, starting with the first encounter all the way up to the Civil War. All right, so early colonization, all the way up to the Civil War and the Reconstruction era. All right, from first contact, since I know everybody in the world is finna celebrate Thanksgiving coming up. Everything we know about American history from first contact all the way up to the Civil War and Reconstruction comes from 28th President Woodrow Wilson, and specifically Civil War era history. All right, President Woodrow Wilson's comments on Birth of a Nation. He said it's like writing history with lightning. So President Woodrow Wilson was a fan of the movie Birth of a Nation. And this was our so-called 28th President of the United States. A President of the United States in the 1900s. We're not talking about the 1800s, 1700s, 1600s. We're talking about in the 20th century, we have a president that supports the racist propaganda put out in the movie Birth of a Nation. Now, if you're not familiar with Birth of a Nation, it was a movie put out by the Klan when the Klan was rebirthed in the 1920s. All right, so the next slide we got. Now, there was an organization.
Look, I got a question. Ain't the birth of a Nation, ain't that when they started the blackface?
Come. All right, so there was an organization that continued to push Confederate propaganda in our school system, and this organization was known as the United Daughters of the Confederacy. Hey, Shalom, Will Christ, sir. An organization known as the United Daughters of the Confederacy. Now, what they did is they were in league with President Woodrow Wilson. All right, it says at the beginning of the First World War, the President General of the United Daughters of the Confederacy wrote to President Woodrow Wilson and offered the loyal support of 100,000 United Daughters of the Confederacy in whatever capacity their services would be needed. Now, where their services would be needed is the origin of a company called McGraw-Hill. Now, McGraw-Hill is where we get all of our classroom textbooks from. All right, and if you're familiar with McGraw-Hill, they had an incident come up in 2015 where they tried to whitewash history and change transatlantic slave trade to transatlantic migration. Now, that came from, again, an organization called McGraw-Hill. McGraw-Hill is the largest publisher of textbooks in the world today. And all of this comes from a teaming up of President Woodrow Wilson with an organization called the United Daughters of the Confederacy. Here's your source at the bottom. All right, it says twisted sources how Confederate propaganda ended up in the South's school books. Now we're going to get into some of this Confederate propaganda because there's some things that we've been led to believe about the Civil War era that's not true at all. And we're going to get into it tonight. All right, first source, Slavery and the Civil War, which the history teacher didn't tell you, a handbook to combat revisionist history. Remember, revisionist history is the history that we got from Woodrow Wilson and the United Daughters of the Confederacy. All right, Gary Bowers, here's your source. All right, introduction. The most effective way to destroy a people is to deny and obliterate their own understanding of history. All right, George Orwell. And that's exactly what happened with Confederate history that's taught in our school textbooks today. And again, that comes from Woodrow Wilson and the United Daughters of the Confederacy. All right, chapter 1, the Civil War that wasn't. All of the misconceptions about the American Civil War, perhaps the most superfluitive is its very name. A civil war by a denotative or connotative definition occurs when a faction wishes to overthrow or control an existing government in order to impose its own ideology upon the governed. So what this book is showing is that the name Civil War is a misnomer in the first place. All right, the southern states that seceded from the Union had neither the desire nor the plans to take command of the country. They simply wanted to withdraw from it. And arguably, according to even some modern constitutionalists and historians, had the right to do so based upon the nation's origins. Virginia, New York, and Rhode Island demanded that the right of secession be reserved before they would even agree to the Constitution, thereby implying that secession was indeed a right reserved by individual states. So we always learn in history class that when the Confederacy seceded from the Union, that it was an act of treason. But according to constitutionalists and historians, the Confederate States had every single right to secede from the Union. And we're going to get into why certain propaganda was pushed about the Confederate States and the reason why the North invaded the South in the first place. All right, the United States had, after all, seceded from Great Britain only 2 generations before the states of the Confederacy did so. But in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve political bonds which had connected them with another. States at the beginning of the Declaration of Independence. So the Confederate States had every right to break away and secede from the Union. But again, we hear in our history textbooks growing up that they committed an act of treason. All right. It says of the 30 or so names for the conflict assigned to both during and after the war from both sides, there are several that describe it as much more accurately than Civil War. Note that this term was used in the very title of this book simply because it is traditional and recognizable, but not because it's accurate. So even the term Civil War itself is propaganda. All right, so this is a map of the so-called free states and so-called slave states. Now I want you to keep your eye in the middle of the country right here on Illinois. All right, Illinois is supposedly one of the so-called free states. So one thing they try to do is they try to promote this idea that the northern or the Union states were the free states and the Confederate states or the southern states was the slave states. So we're going to see that that's not altogether true. All right, the second most common name is the war between the states. However, biased northern writers and other revisionist historians, again, here's that word revisionist again, is a conscious attempt to scapegoat the South, began using the labels as slave states for the Confederacy and free states for all others. We just talked about that. ignoring the fact that up to 20% of slaves were held in free states. All right, 20% of America's slaves were held in so-called free states in the North. All right, 20% of American slaves existed and lived in these northern states. Again, so the idea that all of the southern states were slave states and all the northern states were free states is a bit of revisionist history and Confederate propaganda, again, pushed by Woodrow Wilson and the United Daughters of the Confederacy. All right, it says in U.S. official government records, it is known as the War of the Rebellion. This title, too, is incorrect. In 1867, none other than U.S. Supreme Court Justice Samuel P. Chase noted in his declaration that Jefferson Davis was the president of the Confederacy, we'll get into him later, could not be tried for treason, and their secession is not rebellion. So this label, too, is inaccurate. So like they said, you can't even call it a war of rebellion because Jefferson Davis, president of the Confederacy, was never tried for treason. All right, it says, it is also known widely as Mr. Lincoln's War, which is not too far off base, and the Brothers' War, which sadly is far too accurate. All right, let's go. We scroll down, it says, but regardless of the plethora of names available, it is important to note that only one very obscure and rarely used title for the most devastating event in American history even mentions slavery. It can then readily be concluded that slavery was neither the cause or the focus of the war. Now we'll get right into that. Now we've always heard coming up in school from my history teachers, from my history classes, that the war was fought so the North could free the slaves out of the South, so that Abraham Lincoln could free the slaves out of the South. That's what the invasion was all about. All right, so here's a slide here of a slave auction. All right, I told y'all to keep Illinois in mind. Now, I read to you that 20% of the slaves, 20% of America's slaves were held in bondage in these northern states, in these so-called free states. Let's talk about Illinois for a minute. All right, in 1818, Illinois was admitted into the Union as a free state, but slavery continued. And free blacks were oppressed by a series of restrictive state laws that denied them fundamental freedoms. These Illinois black codes were observed from 1819 to 1865. But under these laws, blacks could not vote, testify, or bring a suit against whites, gather in groups of 3 or more without risk of being jailed or beaten. So we just read that 20% of America's slaves were kept in bondage in these so-called free states in the North. Illinois was one of them. Illinois was one of them. So to call Illinois a free state is revisionist history and Civil War propaganda. All right, they could not serve in the militia and thus were unable to own or bear arms. Blacks living in the state of Illinois were required to obtain and carry a certificate of freedom. Otherwise, they were presumed to be slaves. Again, Illinois was supposed to be a free state. All right, Illinois' blacks laws were repealed in 1865, the same year the United States Congress ended the legal institution of slavery with the passage of the 13th Amendment. So Illinois, a so-called free state, held people in bondage all the way up to 1865. Here's your source, PBS, Early Chicago, Slavery in Illinois. Again, Illinois, according to revisionist history, was a free state. And Salaki, if this is hard to read. All right, now white slavery is a topic that isn't covered very much. And since we deal with the Lord's chosen people, blacks, Hispanics, and North American Indians, we're not going to touch on that today either. All right, but we are going to talk about black slave owners. All right, free black slave masters in South Carolina, 1790 to 1860. All right, it says that yet at one time or another, black slave owners resided in every southern state, which counted as slavery, and even in northern states. Now, we just read that the North had 20% of America's slaves. In Louisiana, Maryland, South Carolina, and Virginia, free blacks owned more than 10,000 slaves, according to the federal census in 1830. All right, next source. It wasn't about slavery, exposing the great lie of the Civil War. Here's your source. All right, introduction. It says, it is all very simple. The establishment historian writes, the Civil War was all about slavery. Again, establishment historians, we're talking about the United Daughters of the Confederacy. We're talking about 28th President Woodrow Wilson. It says the Civil War was all about slavery. And again, that's what we've always heard. That's what we always heard in history class. It says the selfless and morally superior Union soldier, brilliantly directed by prophet and saint Abraham Lincoln, invaded the evil and decadent South with no other purpose than to liberate the oppressed and downtrodden Negro from his cruel, sadistic masters. This is what we were always told in school. All right, Abraham Lincoln, the great abolitionist Abraham Lincoln, invaded the South to free black people from slavery. All right. It says, filled with righteous indignation, these virtuous knights in military blue crushed the traitors and brought emancipation and heaven on earth to black Americans, all while bringing defeat and chastisement to the poor, ignorant Southerners, most of whom were slave owners or cruel overseers who wiped their noses on the shirt sleeves and chewed tobacco, even the women. All right. So this is the picture. This is the picture that revisionist history historians in the early 1900s tried to promote about the Civil War era, and all of it ended up in our history books. All right, it says, the victor, as Churchill said, writes the history. All right, the victor writes the history, but these historians have abused the privilege. Again, the person who wrote what we know about American history comes from President Woodrow Wilson. All right, what passes for history today is cultural and intellectual nihilism, especially when it comes to the myth of the enlightened and noble federal cause. Again, this enlightened and noble federal cause is our belief that Abraham Lincoln was an abolitionist, and the sole cause of the Civil War was so white people, white abolitionists of the North, invaded the South to free black people out of bondage. All right, it says, let's go ahead and go to the next slide. All right, it says, French philosopher Bernard of Chantress remarked a long time ago that we stand on the shoulders of giants. Sir Isaac Newton made a similar pronouncement, but he added that the purpose was to see if the standard of international definition is accepted. One would have to conclude that the objective of Robert E. Lee, we're going to talk about him in a minute, Stonewall Jackson, was to conquer and rule New York City, Chicago, Baltimore, Detroit, and the rest of the North, to label our 1861 to 1865 struggle as Civil War. This, of course, is absurd, though I dare say that all four cities and many more would have benefited immensely from a benign Confederate military dictatorship. It says we reject the term Civil War for good reason. Some prefer the War of the Rebellion, the war between the states, while some refer to it as the War for Southern Independence. Stonewall Jackson called it our second war for independence. All right. It says, after all, if self-determination is good enough for Bosnia and Herzegovina, all right, if you're not familiar with that era in history, go back to the 90s. Why isn't it good enough for Alabama and Mississippi? However, I will use the appellation Civil War in its place, since it is widely understood and conforms to current usage, but it is nothing more than shorthand for the war for Southern self-determination. So again, it's going on to the fact that even the name Civil War is a misnomer. All right, let's walk it down. All right, we've all seen this flag before. We've all seen this flag before. Truth of the matter, this isn't even the flag of the Confederacy. All you have to do is Google flag of the Confederacy, and it'll show you red and white horizontal bars, and then it'll show you stars in a circle. All right, that's the actual Confederate flag. This right here became a battle flag in the South. All right, this flag became a battle flag in the South. All right, and it comes from a group of Cherokee Indians that joined the Confederacy in, I think, late 1863. All right, we see Cherokee Confederate soldiers. We see Cherokee Indians at the bottom. See the Cherokee with this flag. Cherokee with this very same flag. But it's older. All right, this flag is actually an ancient flag. It's actually an ancient American Indian symbol. We see it on the statue right here. See the X? See the stars in it? All right, what we believe as the Confederate flag is actually an ancient American Indian symbol. All right, here it is right here. This is where the so-called Confederate flag comes from. All right, it does not come from so-called white supremacists. It doesn't come from slave owners. It doesn't come from so-called oppressors in the Confederate States. All right, this flag is an ancient American Indian symbol. You can see it right here. We see the Cherokee using it. And when the Cherokee entered the Civil War and fought on the side of the Confederacy, that's when the Confederate Army picked up the idea to use this as their battle flag. All right, next source we got, we're going to get into Robert E. Lee. All right, if you're not familiar, Robert E. Lee was the general, the main general of the Confederate Army. All right, this is a congressional record, United States of America, Proceeding and Debates of the 90th Congress, 2nd edition. All right, it says Robert E. Lee decided on a military career at a very early age. In fact, as a young boy, he decided he would go to West Point. He finally ended up there when he was 18. And when he entered West Point, he had brown hair, a dark complexion. He was 5'10" and weighed 180 pounds. Now, wait a minute now. Robert E. Lee, remember a couple of years back during the Black Lives Matter protests, they were knocking statues down. And one of the statues that they took down was a statue that was supposedly Robert E. Lee. But according to the congressional record, Robert E. Lee, the main general of the Confederate Army, was 5'10", 180 pounds, and had a dark complexion. Now, what does this mean? We'll take it a step further. All right, this is a newspaper archive, Chicago Tribune, July 20th, 1868, page 2, Chicago, Illinois. Alfred Lee, the wealthy colored man who recently died in Georgetown, D.C., was the brother of General Robert E. Lee, the leader of the rebel armies. All right, Alfred Lee, the wealthy colored man who died in Georgetown, D.C., was the brother of General Robert E. Lee, the leader of the rebel armies. So wait a minute. Now it doesn't get any more revisionist than this. All right, it doesn't get any more revisionist than this. It said in the congressional record that General Robert E. Lee had a dark complexion. And it says in the Chicago Tribune, Alfred Lee, the wealthy colored man, was the brother of General Robert E. Lee. Now just let that sink in for a second. Now we've got a Black Confederate. And if you look at his uniform, if you look at his uniform, he's wearing a general star. All right, let's walk it down some more. All right, first Louisiana Native Guard was the Confederate Louisiana militia that consisted of free Creoles of color, formed in 1861 in New Orleans, Louisiana. Some of the unit's members later became the 73rd Regiment Infantry for the United States Colored Troops. So we're going to get into Black Confederates. All right, here's an image of a Black Confederate. All right, Creoles of color were freeborn and enjoyed many of the same privileges that whites did, including but not limited to property ownership, formal education, service in the militia. Again, Black Confederate. During the antebellum period, wealthier and prosperous Creoles of color owned slaves. So now we're talking about more Black slave owners in the Confederacy. All right, next source, slavery in the Civil War, which a history book didn't teach you. All right, chapter 3. Lincoln, the great emancipator, who wasn't. Now, again, we hear that Lincoln was this great abolitionist, and all he cared about was freeing Black people out of slavery. But what we read earlier, like I said, 20% of America's slaves were actually held in northern states. All right, it says, let it be unequivocally said of Abraham Lincoln that he detested slavery on moral grounds. Let it also be said that he did not send federal troops into the South to free slaves, but to preserve the Union. Further, if he were alive today, he would be considered the vilest of racists. Modern political correctness notwithstanding, he held most of the attitudes common in his day. Lincoln was not an abolitionist. Lincoln held no animosity towards slave owners, though he could remember a time when he did not abhor the idea of slavery. He found Northern abolitionists to be extreme, self-righteous, and unrealistic, and underestimating the difficulties it would ensue were slavery to be abolished. So again, this source says Lincoln was not an abolitionist, and he believed that abolitionists were extreme and self-righteous. Again, abolitionists were people who wanted to supposedly free slaves, but if you do a little more study, a little more research on the abolitionists, after freeing slaves, they wanted them out here. Abolitionists were trying to send free Blacks on the next thing smoking to Africa. We'll talk about them in a minute. It says, furthermore, he did not denounce slave owners. I would surely not blame them for not doing what I should not know how to do myself. So this shows right here that Lincoln and others like him had a jealousy for the Confederate States. It said Lincoln's lack of admiration for those enslaved did not end there. Not only did he think they should not be equal citizens, he wished them removed from the United States. Now, I just said that abolitionists were trying to get free Blacks on the first thing smoking out of here. It says that he wished them removed from the United States. So Lincoln, thought to be this great hero in American history, didn't even want Black people in the country in the first place. It said, my first impulse would be to free all slaves and send them to Liberia. Again, they wanted to send Black people on the first thing smoking out of here. All right, on December 3rd, 1861, Lincoln urged Congress to appropriate money for the deportation of Blacks. At that time, he preferred either Liberia or Central America as their ultimate destination. Immediately following secession, Lincoln and the U.S. Congress offered the South the Corwin Amendment, which, among other things, guaranteed permanent slavery forever in the seceding states if they would only return to the Union. So Lincoln, again, supposedly this great hero in American history, he was offering the Confederate States permanent slavery if they would just return to the Union. That 3 states had already ratified the amendment when Fort Sumter was fired upon and approval became moot. When the war began, the U.S. House of Representatives overwhelmingly passed a resolution, which Lincoln agreed, declaring the purpose of the conflict. So it's going to get into why the conflict started. it says not only did this document not even mention slavery as the cause, it asserted that slavery would be preserved North when and the Union be reunited. Now, we didn't learn any of this in history class. Lincoln was actually pushing for permanent slavery of blacks in the Americas. All he wanted was to preserve the Union, and he was pushing documents, signing off on documents that would keep black people in bondage forever if the South reunited with the North. All right, so since we were talking about Lincoln was trying to send black people on the first thing to Liberia. All right, Liberia is in West Africa, and we can't talk about Liberia and West Africa unless we talk about James Forten. All right, James Forten, if you look him up, is one of America's founding fathers. All right, how many people knew that America had black founding fathers? Anybody in the chat? Type it in. How many people knew that America had black founding fathers? Well, here's one of them.
Is that where the first president came from? I forget the black man's name. We're talking about he was the first president.
That's garbage pushed by the Moore Science Temple.
Okay.
The Moors try to say that John Hanson the first.
John Hanson.
He was the first president under the Articles of Confederation.
Right.
They try to say that he was black, but they confuse him with another black person with the same name that was a free person, went actually to Liberia.
Right. Okay.
Same place we're talking about. He was one of the first senators in Liberia, but no, that's a bunch of Morris garbage right there.
Okay.
Yeah. But James Forten is actually one of America's founding fathers. All right, January 15, 1817, James Forten, Richard Allen. Richard Allen is the founder of the AME Church. And Absalom Jones called a meeting to discuss the American Colonization Society in front of a 3,000-member congregation to promote movement to Africa. So again, Lincoln was trying to send black people on the first thing smoking out of here. The first place he wanted to send black people was to Liberia, but you have to get, just like today, if you're trying to push something big for black people, you got to get the church involved. Right. So one of the first things they did, they went to Richard Allen and Absalom Jones, who were the founders of the AME Church, and they were pushing what was called the American Colonization Society. They actually were trying to pay black people to move to Liberia in West Africa. And this was in front of a 3,000-member congregation, and not one single member of the church wanted to go. I wonder why. All right, source, Captain Paul Covey's Laws and Letters, 1808 to 1817. All right, Robert Finley. Robert Finley was a white Slovakian oppressor, and he was the oppressor that founded the American Colonization Society. And the American Colonization Society's sole purpose was to send black people to Liberia and West Africa. It says American Colonization Society was established to address the prevailing view that people of color could not integrate into U.S. society. Their population had grown steadily following the Revolutionary War. White Americans believed that blacks were inherently inferior and therefore should be relocated. Source, American Colonization Society, 200 years of the colonizing trick. Here's your source. In 1822, the American Colonization Society began sending free people of color to the Pepper Coast, which eventually became Liberia. The American Colonization Society assisted in the migration of more than 13,000 people of color from the United States to Liberia. All right, so these abolitionists, they didn't give a damn about black people. All right, I don't give a damn if they're so-called white Republicans, white liberals, white conservatives, white Democrats. They don't give a damn about blacks, Hispanics, and North American Indians. All right, because as soon as they talked about freeing black people out of slavery, the first thing they wanted to do was get them out, send them to Liberia, and get them out of here. All right, here's your source. All right, so who were the Phelps brothers? Who were the Phelps brothers? All right, go ahead and take a look at this. Take a look at this image. All right. So the person on the left is a man named Stephen Phelps. Person on the right is who we know as Abraham Lincoln. Now, if you take a good look, all right, y'all got eyes, y'all can see it. All right. It says one famous image of the president features a body that isn't his. All right, source. Here it is. Abraham Lincoln had a problem. During his 1860 campaign as a Republican candidate for the American presidency, in the era after the birth of the photograph, before it was widespread dissemination in the media, many of the country's citizens could only guess what he looked like. So the majority of people in the United States didn't even know what Abraham Lincoln looked like. So they got an image of him photoshopped from the 1800s. All right, print of Lincoln versus a print of Calhoun engraving. Library of Congress. They were photoshopping back in the 1800s. And they've got an image here of supposedly Lincoln's head on somebody else's body. Because again, photography had just been invented. And most people didn't know what Lincoln looked like. Again, there was no TV. There was no smartphones, no social media, and photography had just been invented. All right, so here's another image. They have supposedly Lincoln on the right and Lincoln on the left, and President Jefferson Davis on the right. And again, Jefferson Davis was president of the Confederacy. Now, the Phelps brother, like I said, this is Stephen Phelps on the left. He had a brother named Myron. And these two brothers were actually used as decoys for famous people in the 1800s. All right, these two brothers were used as decoys for famous people in the 1800s. We've got an image here of photoshopping already going on in the 1800s. Y'all do with that information what you will. But there is a book on it called Fakes and Reproductions. If I may, go ahead and check it out. It's called Fakes and Reproductions. All right. Now, I do have physical descriptions of Abraham Lincoln, but actual physical descriptions of Lincoln, but we're not going to get into it. But we will talk about a source here. Self-made man, the political life of Abraham Lincoln, 1809 to 1849. It said the first time Abraham Lincoln spoke openly about his origins, it was the year he assumed his new identity as a Republican. Until then, he had been remarkably reticent about the facts of his personal life. He was one of the best unknown political figures in Illinois. Yet he kept an essential part of himself mysterious. By 1856, he had been a professional politician on the public view for 24 years. More than half of his lifetime, a stalwart member of the Whig Party. And it was as a Whig that he had climbed rapidly in the ranks. At the age of 27, he was elected to a second term in the legislature, as his peers chose him as the Whig floor leader. He was dubbed the Sangamon Chieftain. Now, the word Sangamon is a Potawatomi word, and the Potawatomi were the Indians that inhabited Illinois prior to colonization and westward expansion by the United States. All right, it says it was at one of those campaign events that the man who had been extraordinarily reluctant about discussing his past, sensitive about his social inferiority, blurted out a startling confession. "I used to be a slave," said Lincoln. He did not explain what prompted him to make this incredible statement, why he branded himself belonging to the most oppressed, stigmatized, and untouchable caste Far worse than being accused of being an abolitionist, Illinois, while a free state, had a draconian black code. Why would Lincoln announce that he was a former slave? Again, here's your source, Political Life of Abraham Lincoln, 1809 to 1849. Do with that information what you will. Again, I'm only showing that Abraham Lincoln was never the person. Abraham Lincoln was never the person that we hear about in our history class. All right, here's an image of Chicago. Says you were on Potawatomi land. All right, 1833 Treaty of Chicago was an agreement between the United States and the Potawatomi tribe. It was the secession Indian removal treaty that was negotiated after the 1830 passage of the Indian Removal Act. Now, the Indian Removal Act didn't just take place in the southeastern states. All right, as a part of the Indian Removal Act, the Potawatomi was kicked out of Illinois and pushed west into reservations in Wisconsin. And the Potawatomi had a chief named Abraham. Again, do with that information what you will. But there's an image of Potawatomi Chief Abraham. Why is he important? Again, we've been talking about Illinois, and the Potawatomi was the indigenous people of Illinois prior to colonization and westward expansion. All right, next slide. This is the First Lady of the Confederacy. This is the wife of President Jefferson Davis of the Confederacy. Take a look. This is the First Lady of the Confederacy. Verena Ann Banks Howell Davis of Natchez, Mississippi. Now, if you know anything about the internal slave trade in the Americas, Natchez, Mississippi is one of the largest transporters of slaves in the Americas after the transatlantic slave trade was abolished. All right, it says was the First Lady of the Confederacy and longtime wife of President Jefferson Davis. She did not support the Confederacy's position on slavery and was ambivalent about the war. All right, so like I said, the Natchez and the domestic slave trade. Again, First Lady of the Confederacy. She was from Natchez, Mississippi. And the Natchez and the domestic slave trade, and decades prior to the American Civil War, marketplaces where enslaved people were brought and sold could be found in every town and any size in Mississippi. Natchez was unquestionably the state's most active trading city. With the invention of the cotton gin in 1793, the advent of the steamboat in 1811, and the introduction of the Mexican variety of cotton in the United States in the 1820s, all helped expand the plantation society in Mississippi after its statehood in 1817. So again, this is the history of the domestic slave trade, because the transatlantic slave trade was shut down in 1808. And Natchez, Mississippi was the home of the domestic slave trade, right where the First Lady of the Confederacy was born. All right, image of some Natchez Indians down in Mississippi who got reclassified as people of color. All right, now we have the Vice President of the Confederacy, Alexander Stephens. All right, sometime member of the Confederate Congress of the Virginia Secession Convention, of the Congress of the United States, and President of the Virginia Constitutional Conventions. Talking about Alexander Stephens, the Vice President of the Confederacy. It says, Mr. Stephens impressed me to the time as a most remarkable man and personal appearance. He was very slender, his complexion very swarthy. So now we have the president or the vice president of the Confederacy described as having a swarthy complexion. And we know that swarthy means black. Again, do with that information what you will. But we do have an image of a black family that claims that they're descendant of Alexander Stephens, Vice President of the Confederacy. Here's an image of him right here. A family claim in relation to Vice President of the Confederacy. All right. So back to slavery and the Civil War. It says the Department of the South, a Union military commanded by David Hunter, declared in 1862 slaves from South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida be forever free. So now we have Southern states freeing slaves in 1862, and we just read that Illinois, a so-called free state, had slaves all the way up until 1865. All right, it said Lincoln and the War Department refused to commission or pay for black soldiers. Hunter returned them to their owners. So the North was using slave labor in their armies. The North was using slave labor for the armies in the North. It says Lincoln then went on to fire Secretary of War Cameron, primarily because he advocated making soldiers of Negroes. So Lincoln wanted no part in having blacks in his army in the Union. It says it wasn't until the issuance of the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863 that Lincoln gave approval for the use of colored soldiers. That was, like the proclamation itself, a matter of politics and expediency, but he stated that slavery enabled the enemies of free institutions to taunt us as hypocrites. And that's exactly what Lincoln was. Lincoln was a hypocrite. It says it was not his love for blacks or even his opposition to slavery that was important, but the perception of other countries that were leaning towards support for the South. And one of those nations that supported the South was the Cherokee Indians, who fought on the side of the Confederacy. All right, it says perhaps the definitive statement Lincoln made concerning slavery's connection with the war came in an interview with famous journalist Horace Greeley. If I may, look up Horace Greeley. Horace Greeley worked for the branch of the Smithsonian that was responsible for hiding American Indian history. All right, it says 2 years after the conflict began, my paramount object in the struggle is to save the Union. It is not to save or destroy slavery. He went on to say that if he could only save the Union by keeping slavery, he would do so. This war was not about freeing slaves. All right, black man, Hispanic man, Native Indian man, our oppressor does not give a damn about us, never has, and never will. All right, here's an image of Lincoln here. Here's an image of Lincoln and Horace Greeley trying to make a deal with the black slave owner. All right, we've got Confederate soldiers, Union soldiers. All right, next source. Salakia, exposing the great lie of the Civil War. All right, and now we come to the real issue of the war, money. Most wars have been about money or the transfer of riches and territory, which also equates money eventually. This economic factor should never be ignored. So it's going to get into the real reason of the Civil War. It says the primary way the U.S. government had to raise funds was via tariffs. Now, tariffs was the word for taxes back in those days, mostly from Southern resources. From the beginning, the South was footing the bulk of expenses of the government. William Grayson, one of Virginia's first U.S. senators, warned that he was afraid the South would become the milk cow of the Union. And that's what they became. It says Grayson proved to be prophetic. Speaking in 1828, Thomas H. Benton told the Senate, before the Revolution, the South was the seat of wealth as well as hospitality. Money and all it commanded abound here. All right. So the South had the money, and the North had always been jealous of the South's money. It says federal legislation was his answer. Virginia and the two Carolinas and Georgia may be said to defray 3/4 of the annual expenses in supporting the federal government. And of this great sum annually furnished by them, nothing or next to nothing is returned to them. In the shape of government expenditures, the South must be exhausted of its money and its property by a course of legislation, which is forever taken away and never returning anything. The new tariff increased the force of action. It says no tariff has ever yet included Virginia, Salakia, the two Carolinas, and Georgia, except to increase the burdens imposed upon them. So we're talking about taxes. They were talking about overtaxing the Confederate States because they were jealous of the wealth of the Confederacy. All right, it said the South and North had a symbiotic relationship. The Southerners brought their slaves from the Yankee flesh peddlers. They were using money loaned to them by Northern banks. And the worldwide industrial revolution was based largely on textile and manufacturing, which required enormous amounts of cotton. The South produced more than 75% of the world's cotton. The New England textile industry was built on this cotton, which was mostly planted, cultivated, picked, and ginned by slaves. Cotton produced by slaves built the North's prosperity like that of the Deep South. So slavery not only was the engine that kept the South running, slavery was the engine that kept the North running too, which is why the North didn't give a damn about ending slavery. As a matter of fact, we read earlier that if the South just returned to the North, Lincoln would impose slavery forever. It said even the North's shipping industry depended on cotton and slavery. The North sent supplies, food, and clothing to the South via ship. These same vessels took that cotton to the New England textile mills. Then they used it to manufacture textiles, which they shipped abroad. As James Madison said, the road to profitable trade for New England ran through the cotton fields of the South. All right, so it was all about the North's jealousy and envy of the wealth of the Confederacy, and they knew that if these people seceded and left the Union, the North would go bankrupt. Because again, we just read that the North profited as much off of slavery as the Southern states did. It said Wall Street and Northeastern banking industry also depended on cotton and slavery. Plantation owners borrowed to buy new land and slaves, and New York banks were more than happy to loan money to them. Cotton was America's, not the South's. Cotton was America's #1 economic product, accounting for more than half of all exports. So the South, the cotton industry, is responsible for half of all exports, not just in the South, but for the whole country. It says by 1860, 80 to 90% of federal revenue came from the Southern export trade, which was largely built on slavery. All right, 90% of the federal revenue in the United States came from slavery. So again, this is what the Civil War was about. All right, the North was on the verge of bankruptcy because 90% of federal revenue came from the Southern trade, which was built largely on slavery. All right, the North was on the verge of bankruptcy. It said the real reason Abraham Lincoln and the more moderate Republicans did not wish to disturb slavery in the South from its establishment up to 1861, the United States government was mostly funded by Southern agriculture and especially the cotton industry, much of which depended on slave labor. Let me read that again. The United States government was mostly funded by Southern agriculture, much of which was dependent on slave labor. If slavery was abolished, federal funding would be eliminated in it. Thus, Lincoln and his allies only opposed the expansion of slavery into the territories. Now, these territories weren't even states yet. All right, these territories weren't even states yet. It says in doing so, Northern Republicans could create and then keep their lock on political power by adding more and more non-Southern states. The Southern states would become isolated and politically impotent vassal provinces and economic colonies, easily dominated and bullied by the more populous North, which would be a position to pick their pockets whenever they wish. So the only reason that the North wanted to keep the slave states in check is so they could bully and extort these Southern states whenever they wanted to. All right, this was all about money. This was all about jealousy. This was all about envy of the Southern states, because the cotton industry is what kept the whole country going. Not just the Southern states, but the cotton industry kept the whole country going. We just read back here. By 1860, 80 to 90% of federal revenue came from the Southern export trade, which was largely built on slavery. All right. 80 to 90% of the federal revenue was based on the cotton industry. So this is what it's all about. The state of Georgia with their own money. Again, it was about the North wanting to have a lock on the Southern states so they can exploit the wealth of the Southern states. The South wasn't having it. The South stepped. The North was on the verge of collapsing. And that's the reason why the Union invaded the Confederate States. And before we end it, since we've been hearing nothing but voting lately, we just had a Voters' Day in Kentucky, where I know that 90% of the black vote went to the Democratic Party. If you look back here, back in the 1860s, tale of two platforms. Democratic platform is for the white man. The Republican platform is for the Negro. All right, this was the state of political affairs back in the 1800s. All right, the Democratic platform for the white man, Republican platform for the Negro. Now, as we know, it switched in the 1960s, the late 60s, under Lyndon Johnson's war on poverty. All right, Lyndon Johnson said these Negroes, they're getting pretty uppity, and that's a problem for us since they've got something now they've never had before, the political pull to back up their uppityness. Now we've got to do something about this. We've got to give them a little something, just enough to quiet them down, but not enough to make a difference. Now, what was that? That was the so-called war on poverty, which incentivized single motherhood in the black community. All right. What was called the no man in the house rule, where women put men out the house and essentially married the state for government assistance. That was the just enough to quiet them down, but not enough to make a difference. And Lyndon Johnson said we'd be voting Democrat for the next 200 years. Well, the Democratic Party gets 90% of our vote today. However, we shouldn't be voting for either side.
Right.
All right, we shouldn't be voting for either side. Let white man business be white man business.
That's right.
All right. So we'll finish it off with the scripture, Deuteronomy 17:15. Says, "Thou shalt in any wise set him king over thee, whom the Lord thy God shall choose. One from among thy brethren shalt thou set king over thee. Thou mayest not set a stranger over thee, which is not thy brother." All right, the Lord is against blacks, Hispanics, and North American Indians voting to put a king over them that's not of our people. All right, knowing that the Democratic Party or the Republican Party neither has never had our best interests at heart. All right. I don't give a damn if it's Donald Trump or Joe Biden. Neither side has our best interest at heart. All right. The Lord is against us voting to put a leader over us that is not of our people. So we'll drop that and we'll end it with Mark 3:25. It says, if a house be divided against itself, that house cannot stand. All right. This is what happened during the American Civil War. The house was divided. And you can see it again today with the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. All right. We need to get out of this mind that we have to vote or die or vote or else, as if either political party has the best interests of Blacks, Hispanics, and North American Indians. All right. Let white man business be white man business. All right. The Bible says if a house be divided against itself, that house cannot stand. All right. This empire that we've been in captivity under for the past 400 plus years is not going to stand. All right. Thermonuclear war is coming to America.
That's right.
And with that, we'll go ahead and end it. Shalom. Yahweh Ba'Shem, Yahweh Shah Barakatham, Yahweh Shemalatham Ba'Shem, Yahweh Shah. Class dismissed.